It was the okay. Well, everybody, good morning. Welcome to History Matters, and so does coffee. Um, Today we are going to be, not surprisingly, talking about the debate and debates. And there's a gender component that I find really fascinating, and hopefully you will as well. There's a race component that I also find fascinating. Um, and in essence, what I want to do almost, not even almost, I want to talk more about method than message. So I'm not going to be talking about necessarily what the candidate said, but I am going to be talking about how that debate played out performance-wise and what that shows us. Because I think it, well, as a political historian, I'm just fascinated by so much that's going on right now. This falls in that category. But before I begin, I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who is on the road, who will explain the rules of the game.
Well, good morning, everybody. Greetings from Mobile, Alabama. I'm at the AASLH conference. I promised those folks I would give them a shout out this morning. So this is how it works. If this is your first time visiting, boy, did you pick a great week to join us. Joanne's going to talk about today's topic for about 30 minutes. You can continue to engage in the chat, but if you have questions about today's topic, we love it if you would put those in the Q&A down below. I'll be back in about 30 minutes and we'll have a discussion.
Wonderful. And I'll add to that, excuse me, if you are here for the first time, or one of the first times, if you will go into chat and tell folks that you are here for the first time, you will get a robust welcome from the History Matters community. I think I just saw that this is the 223rd episode that we've done because we're crazy here at History Matters and we have so much to say. But the amazing History Matters community will welcome you robustly if you will say that you're here for the first time. Okay. Now, I want to talk about the debate. But what I want to talk about, as I mentioned at the outset, is some of the aspects of how it transpired and what that suggested to me. It suggested a number of things that, writ large and having something to do with gender and race, really played out interestingly. And well, I'll come to this. I even did some additional research before I made a claim, because if I'm going to talk about gender, I want to be sure I give everyone a chance to say what they want to say about gender before I quote them. So at any rate, I did. I am a responsible historian. Speaking as a historian, we heard a lot and continue to hear, I think we always hear people saying in a general sense, debates don't matter really. Debates never matter. Now, obviously, in our current moment, we would say that that's not true. But before this current moment, and I would say maybe before June 27th, which I believe is when the Trump Biden debate was, think about that. That's like 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago. It seems like 800 years ago. Um, but before that, people might have said, except for a few exceptions, debates don't matter. Debates don't really matter. Okay, sometimes they don't, but they can matter. And that's the key, right? They may matter, they may not matter. We don't know. They can matter. And I think what we have been seeing recently are debates that can matter. I'm not going to predict what I think the impact will be. We are all watching it as it's unfolding. But in a number of ways, I think what we just saw is really striking and interesting. Now, just for 2 seconds for me to talk about what these debates are supposed to do. Now, I did talk about debates before or after, I don't even remember, the Trump-Biden debate in June. And I went on in greater detail there about debates and about past debates, the history of debates. And so if you're interested in that, go to the archive of past episodes and look for, I'm guessing, the June 27th episode, and you will find that episode there. What I did say at the time, excuse me, is that the idea of these debates, and I'm talking about the modern age with television, the idea was that they would offer a way really to show the character and nature of each candidate in play. Yes, they could talk about their policies, their vision for the nation. TV is not the most supreme medium for communicating deep and meaningful messages with words in the way that one would want for a policy discussion. So that's part of it. But also, from a simple, basic standpoint, with a debate on TV, you see candidates in action. And now in the modern age, you have split screen. So you see them in action individually and in dealing with each other. So in part, it has something to do with showing the character, the nature of the person running. Newton Minow, who was at one point was the chair of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, he said explicitly at some point for the American Historical Association, I did a public program and speaking with him, interviewing him, and talking about debates. And that was one of the things that he said was when this was started, that part of the thought was that it would display the character of people. The other thing he said, and this is part of what is going to lead into what I want to say today, he said that television is the best possible medium through which the electorate, quote, in this large nation can have a shared experience. Shared experience. That's going to be part of what I touch on when I'm talking today. Now, before I plunge into that, I want to say something that leading up to the debate really caught my attention. And as you'll hear, I don't agree with it. And I'm not raking this person over the coals. He feels raked over the coals. He's a pollster, political commentator. His name is Frank Luntz. And he said on some social media forum, I don't remember which, quote, if she wants to win, Harris needs to train her face not to respond. It feeds into a female stereotype and, more importantly, risks offending undecided voters. Okay, so I read that and I had the response that I'm just guessing. A lot of women here now, and maybe who read that, have had or are having, and that is given a lifetime of having men police my voice and my face so that they and being irritated because they look or sound feminine, automatically that gave me pause. Like, wait, train her face not to respond because it feeds into a female stereotype. Okay, so that to me is problematic. Think back to all of the men who have very strong facial reactions. Doesn't necessarily serve them well. And part of his point was strong facial expressions do not necessarily help the person offering them well, but the gender component here is important. And it's not surprising he's a guy. He missed it, right? He just said she can't, she shouldn't. Partly, I suppose, gendered, because I don't know if he's, well, okay, let me say this in his defense, because I don't want to rake anyone over the coals. I wasn't even going to mention his name. But I did go, he was interviewed, I think, on CNN and asked about how people are responding to that fact, the fact that he made that comment. And he said, I'm getting raked over the coals on both sides, with the left, with the right. And part of what he explained as his reasoning for it, he said, I'm a debate coach, I'm a words guy. And anything that you do that detracts from your message is bad. Did her facial expressions add to her message? And his answer to that was no. It's in the way. I would still say post-debate that she would have been better toning down her facial expressions. That feels to me like something that in this moment where our politics has gotten probably is less valid than it once might have been. And let me explain what I mean. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we saw in a general sense during the debate. First off, the handshake, right? So first off, Kamala Harris walked across the stage and shook Trump's hand. Now, generally speaking, that's a normal thing to do. Her crossing over the stage to his space is not necessarily the normal thing to do. And shaking his hand and giving her name to him in his face when he's been so determined to mispronounce it, that had a little zing to it. To me, speaking as someone who's really interested in ritual and manhood and fighting and competition and men trying to be men, what struck me about that is think about what athletes do, like wrestlers I don't know what other sports, because I'm not a sports person, but generally speaking, very often, particularly people who are going to compete one-on-one, what do they do at the outset? They shake hands. Why do they do that? Because it's a way of saying we are equals. I meet you here as an equal. We are fighting as equals. That's what the handshake before a competition means. So on multiple levels, Harris gave her name, she walked into his space, and then she shook his hand and asserted, okay, I'm doing what a polite person does, and also I'm standing here as your equal. There are a lot of people saying, threw him off. He was off from that moment on. I don't know, and I'm not going to guess about that. Totally possible. But what's important to me is the message that she sent, and she gave that message with her presence, with her physicality. Okay, then obviously during the debate, uh, her facial responses, her facial expressions to the words that former President Trump were saying were, to say striking is a vast understatement, right? She was responding not in an unbelievable way. And I think this is going to be important as part of the point I want to make here. She was responding in real time to the words, and we were watching that. Now, as a female candidate, taking that stage, being there opposite Donald Trump, already the possibility is there for her to shake up expectations, because just her being there shakes up expectations. It's only happened once before, right? And so having a woman and a man face to, well, not face to face actually, because Trump didn't really look at her, but next to each other facing us, that's distinctive. You can't say unique, but it has not happened very often. So already expectations are going to be shaken, because maybe it'll be something we expect, maybe it won't. I think that given that she was already, as far as a candidate, a Black woman outside of the box of what was considered normal, she was a little bit freer to come up with her own kind of language of debate. And that's part of what she was doing with her facial expressions. Her arguments, of course, were strong. What she said was smart and powerful. So nothing that I'm saying today is meant to suggest that it was all her facial expression and nothing else. None of this would matter if she hadn't been smart and savvy and prepared and ready and connected and really skillfully looking at us, the audience, right? So she was, former prosecutor, remarkably smart woman in the moment, smart politician, performing well in the content of what she was saying. So I don't mean to put that aside at all. However, what she was doing was he would say whatever it is that he was saying. And as many people have noted, she said some things seemingly to bait him. And every time he grabbed the bait and sort of ran wholesale with it. When he ran with that bait, when he was saying some of the wacky things that he said, she responded not with words, but with facial expressions. Now, had she responded with words, had she said, that's not true. Well, that's, even not even that's a lie. That's not true. Or that's, there you go again, Ronald Reagan. If she had said something back with words, that would have given Trump something to push back against. And she didn't. So he responded sometimes with wacky statements, sometimes by trying to bait her, right? Donald Trump. Joe Biden hates you, right? At one point, he threw that at her, thinking, well, that's some bait. She'll take that. And she just didn't respond. Now, in this particular situation, with this kind of person facing her, Donald Trump, who is narcissistic, who does really think about himself with and pretty much nothing else most of the time. But with that kind of opponent, trying desperately to fight back, she didn't give him a target. He tried really hard to get her to say something that he could then say, oh, I'm going to jump in your face. And she didn't. So he had nothing to fight against. He said something strange. She had a facial response. And there he was hanging in space with the strange thing he said kind of hovering out there. That was powerful because she was just there not being affected by what he said as far as she and her person and her arguments were concerned. But we were watching in real time her response and his relative inability to deal with that. And I think the fact that we were watching her responses in real time is really important because we were watching someone respond in the ways that many of us have been responding to ourselves to some of what Donald Trump has said at some times in the past, right? He says some things, and not all of us, and I know I disagree with some people, so I'm speaking for myself and for those who agree with me. But regardless, he has said things that are so obviously untrue or kind of unbelievable. We've all, again, those who agree with me, have been hearing them, reading them, listening to them, watching them on TV, and have thought strong thoughts about what we think about what those words are, what it is that he's saying. We may not have a way to vent them. We may not have spoken them. We may have gone on social media and vented them a little bit, but for the most part, we've been sitting at home or talking to friends and family or not talking to friends and family, having really strong responses, emotional responses to some of what we've been watching in the realm of many of the things that Donald Trump has said. What we saw during the debate was her having those responses in real time in front of us. And explicitly, for the most part, looking at us. And so, in a sense, what she did was vent feelings that a lot of us have had for a long time and bring us in. At somewhere on some social media platform, I said that what that did, her having those facial expressions to the audience more than anyone else, it created a kind of sit-in of solidarity, meaning we were all sitting there together and what we were feeling was being confirmed because we were watching it on TV. So to me, speaking as someone who analyzes politics and the playing of politics and activities and actions that compose, that comprise, that people do when they're conducting politics, that was really effective because it created an even stronger us. For people who have been frustrated by what Trump has been saying, sitting and watching on TV, someone have the response that many of us have been having on our own and we've been frustrated and whatever, not sleeping and all the other things we've been doing because we're angry or frustrated. We all sat there and watched that together and had a shared experience. And I'm going to go back to Newton Minow. Newton Minow said, go back to his quote, television is the best possible medium through which the electorate in this large nation can have a shared experience. That's what I think happened in part during the debate. I think people had a shared experience of watching someone respond to former President Trump's words. And I think that was powerful. I think that, people responded in a powerful way and then it, erupted everywhere. People are, howling about it in a variety of different ways. And part of it, some of the things that he said are things he said before, but in this forum, with this combination of factors, I think that her facial expressions mattered in a different kind of a way. Now, to go back to the idea that facial expressions are feminine, which I think is wrong, but also to the idea that you should rein in and suppress your facial expressions because they don't help you during a debate. I wouldn't say they're feminine, but I would say if you're a woman up against generally speaking, a bloviating, loud, angry man, yelling back is not necessarily going to get you anywhere and you're walking right into his territory. Whereas finding another way to make your point, and in this case on TV, kind of talking to the public. And in the case of her message, a lot of her messages, I'm working for you. I'm thinking about you. I'm about you. He's not thinking of you. I'm thinking about you. The message and the medium worked really, really well together. And I think, again, the gendered component of this is she did things that some saw as feminine, female, over the top, bad. And I think for the very reason that they were powerful but subtle, which is what we all do as women, right? If we're confronted, often our immediate response is to find a way to respond powerfully to us, but a little subtly because we're potentially walking into, I don't know, a room full of angry men, for example. So, we have to, we don't have to, we often police our own responses to situations in which we're being confronted by a man. And sometimes, in some situations, that can lead to strategizing and just plain smarts that end up proving that howling and screaming is not necessarily the way that you're going to get things done. That thinking like a woman, having to deal with the kinds of confrontations and challenges that women deal with every single day out in the world, speaking with men who are not happy to listen to us, that's training. She's a prosecutor. She's a Black woman prosecutor. She's had that training on multiple levels. So I think, the demonstration of the power of what she did says something about her being a woman candidate, says something about the fact that she could do that in a way. Oops, something just happened here and went away. I'm going to change my camera here. Okay. She could do that in a way, and because people didn't necessarily expect her to do what every man does, she had a little freedom to do what she wanted to do, and it worked really well in this situation, this case, this candidate, this opponent. This is not something I think you can automatically repeat, but where we are now, it had some real power. Now, when I said this online, someone said, I don't know how you can say what you're saying about this being new, given Hillary Clinton, which is a good point, right? She's not the first, she's the second. I do think that Hillary Clinton being first in this situation laid some groundwork for the second person to come along and work on. But, Hillary Clinton, I want to read you this because I found what Hillary Clinton said about the moment that we all recall, again, about performance and the physicality of the moment, right? At the second debate, I believe, between Trump and Clinton, when he was looming behind her in a threatening kind of a way and standing close to her and like invading her territory. Like we all remember that because, again, particularly as women, we feel that, right? So this is what she said when she was recounting that episode in her memoir. She said, "This is not okay, I thought. No matter where I walked, he followed me closely, staring at me, making faces. It was incredibly uncomfortable. He was literally breathing down my neck. My skin crawled. It was one of those moments where you wish you could hit pause and ask everyone watching, well, what would you do? Do you stay calm, keep smiling, and carry on as if he weren't repeatedly invading your space? Or do you turn, look him in the eye, and say loudly and clearly, back up, you creep. Get away from me. I know you love to intimidate women, but you can't intimidate me, so back up." I chose option A, aided by a lifetime of dealing with difficult men trying to throw me off. I wonder, though, whether I should have chosen option B. And here's the point. It certainly would have been better TV. So what we're talking about here is TV, women on TV. I just moved my notes and I just saw someone say, I would have picked B. Well, probably a lot of people would. But again, in the moment, but what she wasn't thinking about necessarily was what would have made better TV, right? Which is, in a sense, part of what I'm talking about here. The gender component, it plays distinctly on TV. And that was a way in which she had the advantage. She was a little bit outside the box because she's not a male candidate, a white male candidate. And what she did and how she did it, because it was addressed to us, it was, I don't want to say subtle, but it wasn't howling and screaming. Really, really powerful. That's, oh God, do you know, someone just sent a recruiting message that just appeared on my screen. Unbelievable. Okay, it's gone. Um, Unbelievable. That's never happened before. At any rate, my point here is in this moment, with this set of circumstances, what happened there is highly significant. The other point I want to make too is on the side of TV and what people saw when they were watching Donald Trump. What I think a lot of people saw, and I'm going to be eager to talk about this in our Q&A. First of all, I do want to say that as far as a race component, I don't know. I really don't know what Donald Trump thinks, but one can imagine that faced by a Black woman, he did not feel that he would be challenged much. He did not feel that he would have to do much. Not that he would prepare, but that particularly in this circumstance, he thought that he could overpower her. She wouldn't present much. I think he called her at one point dumb as a rock. So one can imagine that the gender component and the race component led him into being even less prepared, even less intelligent about this moment than he might normally be. So the racial component of this, I think, joined with the gender component, threw him off. And in that sense, he kind of destroyed himself through gender and race, which is kind of poetic justice. But the point I wanted to make about him is you're seeing, or certainly reading, that there are people who before were on the fence about Trump, and I'm not even going to comment on that, but let's just put that out there. There were some people who are on the fence about Trump and saw this debate and have decided they're not on the fence. Why would that be? And here's the other thing about what we saw on TV. I realize I'm going a little over. I'll be done in a moment. What we saw, normally when people see Donald Trump on TV, they see him at a rally with crowds. And yes, you know, he doesn't always make sense in what he's saying at these rallies. But what we see is a guy on a stage with teeming multitudes cheering him on, and he's performing. Regardless of what he's saying, he's performing. If you want to believe that Donald Trump is your guy, you can watch that and think that he's your guy. Look at him. He's impressive. He's telling him what to think. He's, you know, whatever. You could see how someone who wanted to like him and support him could watch him at a rally and regardless of what he was saying, come away thinking that their views are being supported. You could think the same thing about watching him one-on-one with a respectful interviewer. So he's been on TV one-on-one interviews. Interviewers are respectful. They ask questions, you know, and they treat him like former President Trump. And again, if you are a person who already feels that that's your candidate and you want to support him, you can watch that and stay happily where you are. He's a former president. I'm watching a former president. Regardless of what he's saying, it looks like what I expect to see. And regardless of the words, and who are the media anyway, right? He did fine. He looks like a presidential candidate. What we saw during this debate was him sometimes facing the camera, sometimes not, but just his face, no audience, no performance, just Donald Trump's face talking. No props, no cheering crowd, no interviewer showing, you know, sort of dire respect, just him talking. And I think for some people, that may have been the first time that they saw him that way, that they saw him not as the president competing for office to get reelected, but as a presidential candidate just standing there all by himself in front of the nation talking. And that, in combination with Harris's response to what he was saying, made that, I think, for some people, a revealing kind of a moment in which suddenly he didn't look like what they thought he looked like. It looked different. This is again, TV. I'm not going to go into this because I've talked about this 100 million times on History Matters, the ways in which technology fundamentally shapes democracy. And TV in a big way, and now you can say social media and Zoom, but even just go back to TV, watching candidates on TV doesn't have to have a big impact, but it can have a big impact. And I think we've now twice within a 3-month period seen how having the nation have the shared experience of watching what's happening on TV, when that shared experience is full of unexpected, visually recognizable things, that can have a really, really big impact. In this case, I think the gender component and for Trump, the racial component did throw him off, did open things up for Harris to be a little freer with what she was doing because she wasn't going to sound like a traditional white guy standing there debating during a presidential debate. She had her own platform. She started from her own place. All of that put together, I think, helps explain some of what we're experiencing in responding to the debate. Okay. I always like to have a lesson at the end. And I guess I don't necessarily have a lesson. I will say this is yet another reminder to pay attention about your emotional responses to political things, right? Because I think if you had and had been watching, some part of you, if you agree with Harris, if you don't like Donald Trump, would have been feeling, yeah, yeah, like, yeah, that that is silly what he said. And you could see it on her face. You would have been having emotions and emotional response. As ever, it would be good to pause and think about what your emotional responses are saying. But in this case, with this debate, given that character is important and the shared experience of it is important, emotion had a powerful role to play. Okay. I'm sorry I took a little longer. I was clearly revved up about this topic. Um, and I kept posting it on social media and I kept not getting a response. Because to me, I was like, look at this. This is gendered, race and gender, but the gender component. And again, speaking as a woman whose face and voice has been policed throughout my entire career doing anything in public, I felt this really deeply. Okay, so the mug that I chose, for those of you who are new here, every week for 133 weeks, I've had a mug that has something to do with what we're talking about. I do not have 133 mugs. So this is a repeat mug, but I hope I said 233. At any rate, this is a repeat mug, but it was the best I could find. I was like looking in the cupboard going like, what can I, what can I? And I was like, oh, women politicians,
Perfect.
voices, man. Women
Perfect.
with voices, women who did their thing and were women and got and had power and remained women standing up for women. So that was my mug for today.
Perfect mug for today.
Excellent.
All right. The chat was lit up.
I did not, I was so caught up in this. Normally I see little slivers of the chat, and I did not today. So.
It was fast and furious. Okay. Lots of great questions today. I'm going to start off with one of our favorite undergrad history students,
Let
Sydney.
me say something before you
Oh,
continue.
sure.
Someone just said screen shift, it's hard to watch. I don't know, Claire, if there's a way that
Oh,
people can see
yeah, that's Claire
both
behind.
Annie and me at the same time.
Yep.
Anyway, I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, I know sometimes they say it's like a tennis match.
Yeah.
And their neck gets hurt. Okay. Sydney, our friend from Georgia, that's currently a student enrolled in history, she asked, has there been, I know, yay, has there been any other debates in US history that have stakes as high as they are in this election?
Good question. Sydney asks excellent questions.
It
So on the one hand, I would say, and this is the kind of question that historians are always like, the one, the only, the best, the first, the unique, the like you always pause because you know if you say something is going to be wrong. So would I say it's the only election that's been this important? No. I would say, and I've been saying this for years at this point, I truly believe that democracy is on the ballot. I'm not saying that to score points. I'm not saying that to get people to listen to me. I believe it is. I believe we are voting for it or against it. I believe we have some people who want power who don't necessarily believe in the fundamentals of democracy. If people say, if the election happens and all the states certify for one candidate and that candidate wins the election, will you abide by that? And if their answer to that is not necessarily, that is not a person who is bound by the democratic process. So at any rate, that's really happening. We're in that moment, and I'm not, hyperventilating about this. I'm not exaggerating. I believe that to be true. I have for a while, and I will not stop saying that. I will not. But yes, I saw someone on the bottom say Lincoln. Yeah, there have been other elections that were vitally important. I mean, if you do go to the 19th century and look at, and again, even in the realm of debates, right? The Lincoln Douglas debates, not TV. There's a case in which only certain people said it, but then they read it and didn't see it, and only certain people saw it, but then they read it, and reading it and seeing it is not the same thing. But regardless, presidential elections that had anything to do with slavery were pretty vital, right? Pretty important, and particularly when Lincoln, by the time you get to Lincoln, you are now talking about the Union dividing. So there certainly have been contests and elections that have been this crucial. There have been debates of one kind or another that have been really important. I mean, we could talk about, I mentioned in one of my classes, Nixon and Kennedy, right? Nixon sweating and looking, like really unseemly. And I think I said, maybe again on social media, like this is making me think of Nixon kind of on its flip side. Nixon looked horrible and his visual, his appearance had a huge impact. And Harris's appearance had a big impact too, simply in her facial expressions. Similar example of the power of TV in these kinds of situations. So that's a long, drawn out answer. But the answer is there have been other contests that are vitally important. There have been other debates, even if they're not on TV, that are vitally important. But as I know I must have said before, history doesn't repeat, and context matters, and the realities of the moment matter. We haven't had this moment before with this combination of things adding up to this particular crisis, and that matters. So yeah, I think in that way, what we're going through now is distinctive because we haven't been through this kind of crisis before.
I put something in the chat while you were talking earlier that in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, political cartoons about this debate are what history teachers will analyze.
That's
I would,
true.
I would be around to see that, but I do
Already
think,
they're starting. I think the
yeah.
cover of the New Yorker, for example.
Oh, wow. That
Um,
was,
so yeah,
yeah. All right,
there's
we
going to be
got
a lot of materials, primary materials that will be excellent for classroom use in one way or another, coming out of this moment. That's true.
maybe Carolee and I should write a lesson plan and put it in a time capsule and tell them to open it in 100 years. I'm going to put that on our to-do list, Carolee. Okay. Miranda asks, how much do you think the Taylor Swift announcement at the end of the debate helped or distracted, especially now that we know over 340,000 voter registrations were held in the first 48 hours that were directly linked from Taylor Swift's site, her website?
Well, so here's what I love about that is because that's just voter registration. Those aren't people who registered a vote. Those are people who said,
Right.
I will vote.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just good, right? That's just uniformly good. And if you're on the right and you assume that most people who are Taylor Swift fans are going to vote on the left, I don't know that. Uh, but that is not going to detract from the fact that hundreds of thousands of people are now registered to vote who are not registered before. And, I salute that, man, because the more people who vote, the better. And if you don't want people to vote, if you're trying to get fewer people to vote, that's a red flag. you
Not
know,
America.
that's not, well, it means you're strategically, there are some people you don't want to vote. And as soon as you're in that zone, bad things. But what was I missed, I have now not answered part of the question. What was the other part of the question?
Oh, just the part about
Oh,
how many people registered to vote immediately after
did it
she made the
distract?
announcement.
Yeah.
It came directly from her website. One of the polling companies said these are the ones we got that we can definitively say were a direct link off of her site because they can
I
track it.
mean, did it distract? If it had happened before, I think that actually would have been a mistake. So I'm glad it didn't happen before the debate. You know, did it distract from the message of the debate? I don't think so, because I think the message of that debate was pretty darn clear by the time it ended. What I do think, the sort of punctuation point at the end of that evening, is the fact that she signed her announcement, Childless Cat Lady, right? So what she did in her announcement was go right back to some of the things that the right has been saying that have been registering so powerfully. for some on the left, and again, in particular, women on the
Young
left,
women too,
young women, well,
but all women.
I'm a childless
I
lady,
I am too, but I'm
right?
just
It's
saying,
like,
like,
but young women
she
particularly.
knows her demographic.
She is, but again, there's such a strong gender component about that evening, about the kind of power Harris used, about the reason it was powerful on TV, about the fact that at least some men not only didn't think it was powerful, but wanted her to tamp it down. And then in the end, that the childless cat lady, meme helped kind of seal the deal. Yeah. So, if I were writing about this election in 40, 50 years, the gender component, I would have the best time writing about the gender component and I would look and get research on how women responded to what was going on and what they said and didn't say. I would have a blast just trying to get at how what people were seeing and hearing, not always in a conscious way, profoundly shaped what they were thinking politically. That's the sort of stuff, as a historian, I love, because it's not easy to find, but if you can find it and you have evidence to show it, like Northerners being scared of opposing slavery in Congress because Southerners are going to do scary things, if you have the evidence to prove that, you see politics in a really, really different way. Emotion as something that fundamentally shapes politics, even on the floor of Congress, that I find fascinating, and that's some of what we saw uh, during the debate.
Yeah. All right, we have a couple of questions that I'm going to combine from our friend Gloria. Hi, Gloria.
Hi, Gloria.
She asks, how do you feel about the obvious bias of the panel questioning the candidates? And what was I guess she means Harris's, what was her solution to inflation, crime, and immigration? How was she thinking about us?
Okay, so I personally, I don't think the panel was biased. Personally, they did push back. This has not been happening. To me, that's not a bias, and I think um, the same should happen for Harris. The same should happen for both people. If they say something that's blatantly wrong, then I think for the not to have a tone, not to have an attitude, but for a moderator to say, well, that's actually not the case. Let's move on to the actual question, which is what happened a few times, right? That's not, you know, Trump said crime is on the rise. And one of the moderators said, actually, the FBI figures say that crime is decreasing, it's lowering. Um, that's a fact. His response, those are fraudulent claims. That's a problem to me. But at any rate, I actually don't think that the panel was biased. One could argue a panel is biased if they let blatant lies fly and then just sit there and allow them to happen. I don't think lies should be responded to with attitude and emotion, because then, if a moderator said, that's not true, well, then, yeah, then that would be bias. But by saying, you know, that didn't happen, to me, that isn't bias. And as far as, I don't want to talk about policies and content here. As far as knowing, the details of what either candidate wants as far as inflation or immigration and whatever, I don't think we know anything about, in granular detail, we don't necessarily know about either candidate. I do think we have a very strong sense from both candidates about their vision for the nation, about the tools that they would use to enforce that vision and the ways that they would use those tools and the issues that they consider to be of primary concern and the sides that they fall on regarding issues like immigration. So as I started out by saying, I don't think these debates, generally speaking, are ever going to end up with having deep debates about policy, and Americans are going to listen and say, ah, yes, I love her economic strategy. I don't think that's what these debates are really about. And Newton Minow really didn't think that either. So I personally, I don't think it was biased. But I think, it's a different question, maybe for a different time, is what should happen. People have been saying, check the facts, check the facts. And I have seen people saying, why weren't you checking Harris's facts? And I think she said one or two things that were incorrect. I think she said something about Project 2025 that wasn't true. But the fact that I know that means somebody checked it. But still, you know, getting angry because some of what Trump is saying is getting checked, and it seems like it's a lot more than Harris. Well, generally speaking, he lies more. It's what he does. And I don't think that's a biased statement. I think that's a fact that he, for whatever reason, he says a lot of things that are untrue and then refuses to admit they're untrue when presented with evidence that they're untrue.
All right. So Dave, who's with us almost every week, so we love it when Dave's with us. He asked about how important is nonverbal communication, body posture, facial expression in televised debates, and he cites the way that Harris laughed at Trump talking about people eating dogs or cats as a one of the moments, and also him refusing to make eye contact, his being hunched over, continuously scowling throughout the debate. He's wondering,
Yeah,
like,
I,
how
I,
much
I
of
want to
that.
say one thing before I answer that, just to be um, Lawrence Schmidt says she was off in her comment about military personnel, and I don't know that, so I can't say yes or no, but it's worth mentioning. I don't want it to sound like I am ignoring things. But at any rate, the question you just asked was body language. Oh, I think it matters a lot because I really do think, as much as we try to get content and meaning from TV debates, Sydney is going, bye, Sydney. It's the watching of it. It's the performance aspect of it that comes across most powerfully. So yeah, I think hunching or scowling or not looking at the other candidate or looking at the other candidate. I can't remember who it was who looked at their watch in the semi-recent past. And does anyone remember which candidate, while on TV, looked at his watch? Gore, right? So that's not good, right? So I do think that things like that. Oh, George Bush. Okay, not Gore, Bush, or both. I couldn't tell you which, but whoever it was, Bush or Gore, Republican or Democrat, that was body language that, again, you could see a person like just glancing and thinking it doesn't matter, and it's on TV and it matters a lot. So no, I think that sort of stuff, particularly because it seems not thought through, it seems natural, right? Like they're just doing what they do. That has an impact because it seems like you're catching people saying or doing something that they don't necessarily want you to see. So yeah, I think that has a big power that becomes, again, the medium becomes a big part of the message. And I think that's true for physical posturing too.
All right.
Oh, there we go. Someone, the Gish Gallop. Yeah, I mentioned that. I had notes on the bottom of my notes here that I didn't go into, but the Gish Gallop, just to remind people, I talked about that after the Biden-Trump debate, is when you just spew out so many facts and details and things so quickly that no one can respond. You can't refute them. You can't fight back. And that was being talked about with the Biden Trump debate, like, oh, the Gish Gallop, he's going to throw all kinds of things out and a lot of them aren't going to be true. And then you can't respond. And how do you deal with that? And there were all of these articles about, like, how do you debate against Trump when he's going to do that? And part of the answer we just watched. You don't throw back words, I think. Okay.
All right. That was a good one, Dave. Thank you. We have one from Linda, who also is one of our community regulars. She said, in my opinion, it was a masterful performance. She handled the Gish Gallop better than anyone so far, presenting her policies, refuting the key ones on the many lies, using her face to refute many more. Was this the best presidential debate in history?
Oh, I would never make a statement like that. I never would. And also, by what are you judging best, right? Is it the best in content? Is it the best in meaning? Is it the best in vision? Is it the best in competition? It's so I think already that's hard to answer, but I think, in different times in different places with different forms of media, I don't think you can actually answer that question. I think it's distinctive because of the moment that we're in, because there was a Black woman candidate, uh, and because Donald Trump again, as a politician, is so kind of in his own category. Um, it certainly is a standout. So, 30 years from now, yeah, there we go. Abraham Lincoln coming up again. Yeah. So Abraham Lincoln, there are debates of various sorts for president or not for president, actually, I should say, that have been equally important. But if you're a historian in the future looking back to debates that stand out that are worth discussing and unpacking because they have something to say, this will be one of those, I think.
Yeah. All right. Robert gives us a little bit of a timeline. He says 1988, Ferraro, first woman VP of a major party. 2008, second woman nominated for VP. 2016, Clinton, first women candidate
That's
of a
true. I have
major
not been
party.
thinking about VP. That's very true.
Yep. And then 2024, Harris, second woman so nominated. His question is progress?
Well,
I like the
yeah,
timeline.
right. It's a good timeline. And that is a good reminder. I've been talking about presidential candidates as though no other woman has been in that situation. And absolutely a good reminder. There have been vice presidential candidates, women, facing this similar situation. Progress. So, when I teach the 18th and the 19th century, and I teach about women and their how they fare in society, their status in society, their rights in society, and students very much want the story to be this, and it isn't, right? It's as far as women in society and their rights and their status, it's never, this is true of many things, particularly groups that have been marginalized. They fight, they work, they move up, and then something pushes back, and then it's always meandering. So has there been progress between now and a big chunk of the past? For sure. But what does this mean in the long haul? I don't know. It's like people who were saying when Obama got elected that, they didn't put it this bluntly, but basically they were saying now racism is done. Right? And it was like, we just did a big thing. We have our first Black president. And that mattered immensely. That mattered immensely. I will never forget what that felt like. But that didn't that didn't start off a trajectory of good. It just shifted the debate. And so, is there progress? Yes. Is some of what we saw and some of what I've been talking about here progress? Yes. Um, but does that mean we have moved beyond a certain level of things? I have no idea. As I said before, I can talk about the ways in which things are at risk. What no one knows is where we're gonna end up, even in the immediate future. you know, I'm going to say it. I say it every week. Contingency, right? We live in a moment of extreme contingency. All history, all time is contingent. We do not absolutely know what's going to come next, but there are moments when really it's unclear. The fundamentals, the foundations of things are being shaken, and we really don't know what's coming next. And we are in one of those moments. I said when I was being filmed for something on CNN, I said really bluntly, looking at the camera, anyone that tells you they know what's coming next, they're lying to you. That did not make it,
That's great.
but
I
it
gotta
felt
find that
so
on
good.
YouTube. That didn't make the cut? Are you kidding?
No, it did not. It felt so good to say.
Well, we
I
have
even
it
had to
now,
like,
and Claire can make that into a TikTok or whatever. We need that clip, Claire. I want it by the end of the day.
I'm not normally I act like someone said, way to use technology skillfully, Carolee, right? I'm not normally that person, but I felt it so strongly. And after, 230 episodes saying, contingency, it was finally my moment to
Yep.
say to the American public, contingency. Yeah,
That's so funny. Okay, I hope we have time for one more because there's a
yeah,
really interesting question from
yeah, for
Becky.
sure.
And I'm not sure, Becky, if this is your first time or if you've been with us before. Becky says, can you speak to the surrogate debate in 1956 between Eleanor Roosevelt and Margaret Chase Smith and how that affected the Eisenhower-Stevenson election?
Oh, I wish I could. I wish I could. I cannot. I do not have that
Question.
information. And it's a wonderful question. I do
Mm.
not have that information readily available, given that my most detailed election information, is sort of 19th and 18th century rather than 20th and
Mm.
21st. But that's an excellent question.
Yeah,
It's,
I
it's
like
an excellent enough question that it makes me want to go look it up.
I know, right?
For
So
fun.
it'll be in the chat transcript for those of you in
Yeah.
our Slack group. I put the directions in earlier how you can join. You can look it up. Maybe Carolee's tadpoles could research it for us.
That would be a question for Heather.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We have a lot more questions. It's up to you how many more you want
Let's
to
let's
try.
let's do a little bit. We're just right on the
Okay.
dot. We can go a little long.
All right. So, Troy asked, when Trump said that she had put out, was he saying relative to his assertion that Vice President Harris at some point claimed to be Black? Or as I've been seeing other people say, was he making a crude sexual reference? I'm guessing the former, as the Harris Waltz campaign ignored it, and I don't think they would have ignored a sexual reference.
Okay, so I can only tell you what it felt like to me. And I don't know if they would have ignored it or not. I don't know. I personally, even if it was clearly a sexual reference, I might not want to call attention to that at all. She's not running on a woman power message. She's running on a power vision message. So that might lead her campaign in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, and I encourage you to go back and look at it and see for yourself. It felt like a sexual slur because what he did was he paused and he said something like, or this is my memory of it. Yeah, I'm going to say it. She put out and then stopped. He clearly thought he was crossing a line. And I don't know if he would have done that if he was talking about race. Maybe he would, but it felt to me like it was more than the Black issue. But again, I don't know. That's what it felt like. But it was blurry enough that even as it was happening, I saw people responding in real time saying, "Did he just say what he said? Like, is that what he said?" So, you watch it and you decide. But that's not a new claim on the right. It's not like this is the first time that's been suggested. So I don't know, is my answer.
All right, Miranda, I know everybody has a lot of good questions. We already did a Miranda question, but this one is so good. We have to do this one. Does Kamala Harris's background in regard to race and gender, as well as being the first Gen X candidate, influence her debate style because of our shared Gen X experiences, which are very different from previous generations? Could this be the new, and I'm sorry, I'm not cool enough. I don't know what FAFO. She said, could this be the new FAFO generational style debate?
F around and find out.
Okay. You're cooler than I am.
I just became like
Okay.
1% cooler than I thought I was.
Yeah,
I
you're
do
way cooler
think
than me. We already
I
knew that.
well, I'm on social media. That's not true, but I'm on social media. Um, I do think, and I it didn't talk about it necessarily, and I guess it wasn't explicitly true about this debate, but there is a really powerful generational component to what's going on now. And you could see it at the conventions, right? You could see it at the RNC, at the DNC, and the Republican convention looked like what you expect, in a sense, a convention to look like. It's kind of going along. It's a little staid. You have, oh, from the great state of California. We all know what they look like. That was not what happened in the Democratic convention. That was like a whole different category. And part of what that felt like to me in the tone of the convention, in the people who were standing up to speak and the way in which they spoke. That felt to me like a sea change in tone, and a lot of that is generational. And the people who stood up and spoke the older generation, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they felt like they were of a different generation than the people doing most of the speaking. So I do think there's a generational component here, and I do think that communicates. I think again, if I were writing about this election in the future and looking back, the social media team working for Harris and the way in which they're very skillfully using that in a way that feels again, like a totally different generation from what's come before. Really interesting, right? The ways in which humor and a little snarkiness and I have not seen it, but I read this morning before coming on here that her social media team said, here's our latest ad, and just put up the entire debate. That's that's
That's great.
so that's,
Wow.
people have been saying, and I've been saying, right, for a long time, like, push back. Come on, Democrats, push back, push back. And, they've tended to be, we institutions, rules, we always, when they go low, we go high. We do what you should do. What's happening now isn't necessarily people doing the wrong thing, but they're pushing back. And that's new. And that also to me feels a little bit generational because you can do that and not seem crude if you do it with the right tone. And I think that's partly an age thing, a generational thing. This is such an interesting political moment. You can see I'm like levitating out of my seat
It
because,
is.
it there's so much change happening in real time. I talked at some earlier point in some earlier episode about how both parties are so fluid right now. And, it's not always been the case that there were two clear parties in American history, and both parties, there's all kinds of stuff going on as far as who they are, what they are. Although now the Democratic Party is kind of cohered more than when I said that initially. I think I said that actually in one of my Instagram conversations with Heather is where I said that. At any rate, so many things are happening that from a historian point of view are fascinating. That yeah, I as ever there's, Joanne Freeman, historian brain over here saying, this is so interesting. And then there's Joanne Freeman, American citizen brain saying, oh. So anyway, okay, we're like a little past. Maybe we should stop. Yeah, Heather and I love to do Instagrams. It's just hard to get us pin both down, but I'll bring it up to her again. Anyway, okay, so let's segue to the after party. We had a lot of people here today, and I want to thank you for being here. Let me explain what happens next. So, we are now going to segue into the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording. I still always think of the time that I said we'll turn off the cameras. It's like, well, then what happens? I know, we'll be sitting in the dark. We will no longer be recording so that we can be even freer and easier in what we want to say. If you beamed in through the NCHE website, just stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are watching us from Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you too will be in the after party. In a big way this week, I want to say what I've said before, which is thank you for engaging in the conversation of democracy. It's always a thing that we should be here and that we should be doing. Talking about the debate, in a sense, is a way of showing how that conversation matters on all levels in every way that it's happening. Thank you for engaging in that, for being here for that, continuing to do that. We're going to have so much to talk about in coming months. Thank you for being the force behind democracy, people having conversations, asking questions, listening to each other, not always agreeing, and being able to do that civilly. I can see a little something brewing there on the side. And so I'm saying that because we don't have to agree, and that's okay. Anyway, so I am gonna stop talking. I want to thank Annie and Claire and Jessica and NCHE and John and everybody else. I'm gonna thank everyone for making this possible. And I'm going to shut up so that we can poof and go to the after party.